5,
4,
3,
2,
1,
go.
Hello and welcome to Space Now, the space news podcast from the National Space Centre that goes beyond the headlines. I'm David Southworth.
And I'm Josh Barker.
Coming up today, Pixar's new film Elio is a first contact story about a young boy who unwittingly becomes the Earth's representative in the galactic community. But what would a real first contact scenario look like? We explore how different films have covered this topic and look at the protocols that might kick in real life. But first, as ever, we're going to cover our space wows, things that have caught our eye in the headlines this week. Josh, what have you got for us this week?
Well, for this week, I'm going to ask you a question. What's
Okay.
better than one giant cosmic explosion?
Okay. I mean, a giant cosmic explosion sounds quite bad, to be honest, so maybe none.
If you're very close.
Yeah.
Well, I would go the other way, and I would say what's better than one is two
Okay.
giant cosmic explosions. This is a new story that's been reported literally today as of writing, and it's the first detection of a double exploding supernova.
Interesting. So that's two separate stars?
So this is specifically a Type 1a supernova.
Okay.
Now, we're going to get technical now, but this is when you've got two stars, usually one that's reached the end of its life, what we
Yep.
call a white dwarf, and it sucks all the material off its companion star, and when enough builds up, they explode. So once they've reached a certain limit.
Companion star, these are binary systems?
Yep, so these
Okay.
are usually binary systems, two stars orbiting each other. And we know this process really, really well. It's well studied. In fact, it provides a standard reference for what we look out for across the galaxy.
Right.
And it'd been theorised that potentially you could get this happen twice.
Okay.
Now, this seems quite rare because usually the star blows itself up. Type 1a supernovas are enormous explosions that typically destroy the star. But if you wrap your star in a layer of helium, technically it could survive to explode again.
Okay.
And we, for the first time, detected that that is true.
That's fantastic.
So we got a fantastic image taken by the Very Large Telescope. Hopefully we can put that image up for you right now. Hopefully it's appeared. And we saw details showing that there was this two-stage explosion, which is the very first time we've seen it, and is pretty impressive and quite spectacular.
That is phenomenal. So a very, very interesting phenomenon that we can hopefully learn more about those kind of cosmic events from.
Yeah, so now we know that it happens, we can start to look for it, we start to know what we can find out about it, and it changes a little bit of our understanding of what happens to stars when they blow up. These supernovas usually only happen when a star gets above a certain size,
Yeah.
but there's evidence now that they can happen when they're a bit smaller because of this sort of double detonation experiment.
That's amazing.
So David, what have you seen in the headlines?
Well, now mine's actually from a couple of weeks ago. This is
Okay.
something I'd spotted a couple of weeks ago, but I think we never quite picked it up on one of these. And I
Right,
thought it's
okay.
interesting enough to come back to. This is a mission called the Proba 3. It's a European Space Agency mission, ESA. Now, it's amazing because you know how we use solar eclipses to see things about the sun that we couldn't normally see? Well, we
Yeah,
have a total solar eclipse.
The moon blocks the light out and we can see just the edge of the atmosphere. can't we?
Precisely
Yeah.
that. So we can see much closer to the sun. We can see objects that are close to the sun but in the distance. I think early solar eclipses, they used them to verify some of Einstein's theories of relativity.
Yeah, we spotted a star that should have been behind the sun and it showed that the
And we
gravity
saw
is
that
bending light.
Precisely,
Yeah, I
the
remember
light's
that.
bending. Well, those are very rare. They happen roughly once every 2 years, I think, and you've got to be in exactly the right place, and they last for a few minutes at most. Well, this mission is two independent spacecraft that are flying together. They launched together, but then they separated, and they're orbiting the Earth in quite an elliptical orbit, so coming into about 600 kilometres one part of the orbit and out to 60,000 kilometres the other part. And when they're at the furthest part, the apogee, I think they call it, they're able to make a fake eclipse.
Oh, wow, okay.
So there's two spacecraft. One has the instruments on board.
Yep.
One is essentially just creating a shadow.
Oh, okay,
So
cool.
they're flying about 150 metres apart, perfectly in line. They can do it for up to about 5 or 6 hours, and
Right.
they're autonomous. So they use automated data to fly themselves and keep that perfect eclipse. Perfect up to a millimetre, I believe. And one thing that I also thought was incredibly clever, so obviously that's going to give us that sort of information without having to wait for a solar eclipse.
Yeah, and like you said, the time, 6 hours. I think last time we saw an eclipse here in the UK, it was like 6 minutes.
Something like that, yeah.
I imagine scientists are very excited
And it can
for
do
that.
it once a day because the orbit takes about 19 and a half hours, so very quick. But what I also found amazing is that as it comes close to the Earth, it picks up data about the position it's got, the velocity and so on, and so it corrects itself. It corrects its course by picking up that data
Oh,
when
wow.
it gets
And it
close
does that
to the Earth.
automatically?
Yeah. So that's
Impressive.
an upload of data. It corrects itself so that the next go round, it can still get its perfect eclipse.
I like it.
So yeah, that's a fascinating thing. I thought that was probably worth coming back to, even though it's a couple of weeks ago now that the first image was released that showed stuff like the corona. We talked a couple of, actually it wasn't us, it was Ed and Dara, I think, talked a couple of episodes ago about the Parker Solar Probe. And this is one of the things I find really interesting about space and science in general. This is going to learn some of the same sort of stuff, some of the mysteries of the corona and why it's hotter than the surface of the sun and things like that. But it's two very different ways of going about it. One is firing a spaceship through the corona, a really kind of aggressive way. And one is, I think, a slightly more imaginative way, making a fake eclipse. So that's my space ride this week.
Excellent. And I think we can see an eclipse soon. I think next year, next summer.
Next summer, there's
in
one
Spain,
coming up
I
in
think?
Spain, north of Portugal, Greenland and Iceland, I think,
We'll
are
have
the
to see
land masses.
We'll have to see if we can convince to do the podcast on the road, perhaps.
Oh, imagine that. Good luck with that. Good luck. Now, a quick word of warning before our first section. In this section, we're talking about a few science fiction films. We've tried really hard not to give away any major plot spoilers, but if you'd rather have no spoilers at all, then please skip to the end of this section. So, on now to our main topics. Now, as we said in the introduction, we're basing this around the Pixar film Elio, which has recently been released. Josh, I don't think you've seen it.
No, I've not had the opportunity to see it, but I believe you have.
I have. I saw
that's
it at the
good
weekend.
that one of us has.
Yeah, so we're going to try and really hard not to do spoilers for this. So just a very brief summary. As I mentioned, it's a young boy. Let me start with this. Are you a fan of Pixar films?
I do quite like Pixar films.
Okay.
They,
Then
a
you
large
know
part
what
of
to
my childhood.
expect. Some trauma in his life. He's going through some grief.
Mm-hmm.
He feels like an outsider. All that kind of standard stuff. Dealt with really nicely. And he gets really into space. Part of the reason he gets into space, he's taken by his aunt, who's now his guardian. He goes to a gallery in a space museum that's being redeveloped.
That sounds kind of familiar.
I know. I got a couple of ideas from there that I might pass through to our creative team. And he sees an exhibit which talks about, or kind of shows plays a recording of the music and the words on the golden disc.
Oh,
the
yeah.
one that went on the
From
Voyager
the Voyager
probes.
missions, yeah.
Exactly. And it really inspires him to space. He's desperate to be abducted by aliens. He becomes really obsessed. He kind of goes to the beach every day and sort of sets out this message for aliens, please come and abduct me. So a lovely start. And then, through various situations, it happens. He gets taken on board what they call the Communiverse. It's a kind of a floating United Nations of various alien races. They've been looking for Earthlings, that's probably the right phrase here, because they've found one of the Voyager probes.
Right,
So
okay.
Exactly what we aimed for with the
Yeah, that's
golden
sort of been
disc.
a
We're
soft
trying to send a
aim,
message.
hasn't it? Yeah.
So the nice touch that they managed that. We won't go into the detail of what happens there, but all kinds of adventures ensue. As you'd expect with Pixar films, people grow, people learn, people become more tolerant of each other. It's a really lovely film. I think if you are either you are a kid interested in space or you have kids interested in space, I'd really, really recommend it. It's really quite lovely.
Yeah, it's definitely on my list of things to see. I just not got time for it.
Yeah.
But I think it's a really interesting idea of how we explore aliens. It's a thing that we've always, one of the oldest questions that we've got since we started looking into space is that, are we alone? And we've got, some people are very, hope we're not, because we picked aliens, sometimes not as the friendliest, but it's really interesting to see that idea of becoming part of a galactic community, I guess.
Yeah. One thing I found very interesting in this film, actually, is that there's not a direct threat to Earth.
Right, okay.
Elio goes up to space, becomes a part of the Communiverse, really likes them, wants to live there because he feels like an outsider on Earth. And then there's a threat to the Communiverse.
Right,
So he's then trying to help with that. Rather than it being a direct threat to Earth, which I thought was quite a nice touch.
Yeah,
It's like a different way of looking at things.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think I've seen similar. I remember when seeing the trailer and hearing about this film very briefly before. I read a book when I was very, very young. I think it was called My Teacher is an Alien, which starts out as this sort of alien hidden as a teacher.
Yeah.
But then I think the sequel to that one is one of their classmates finds an alien device that makes them smarter. And eventually they join this community of aliens that are considering whether or not humanity should be allowed to survive and exist. And then the story is sort of us convincing them that we're useful and good and interesting and nice people and we should be part of it.
Similar but different.
Yeah, it's interesting to see. But perhaps if you say this is sort of more of a threat to their community and I guess humanity through Elio helping out, is that the vibe or is that not quite?
There's never, I don't want to say too much,
Okay,
there's never a
course.
direct threat made to humanity. There's a kind of implied there could be a future
Right,
threat.
okay.
But it's very much about trying to help out his new friends in the Communiverse, which I thought was a nice twist. There's also, by the way, a very nice little brief nod to Terminator 2.
Okay.
I'll leave that there. obviously aimed at a
Intriguing,
different audience. So yeah, on the back of that, I hope I haven't said too much. I think we stayed the right side of spoilers there. We wanted to look at other first contact films, and we were talking just before we started recording this and talking about how we might choose to sort of categorize these films. So I said the first thing that comes to my mind is an alien invasion, War of the Worlds, Independence Day.
It
Classic.
does feel like a go-to sort of trope, I guess, is that like we're safe and delicate and we think we're doing great, and then all of a sudden aliens turn up and turns out we're maybe not the biggest fish in the sea, and there is a threat. And you'd like to say things like Independence Day, classic films, War of the Worlds. I grew up with adoring War of the Worlds, especially the musical version.
Yeah,
I think that was Jeff Wayne, I believe.
Okay,
but I got his CD and listened to the music for that and really enjoyed that. And my grandparents had, I think, the original 1950s or 60s War of the Worlds film.
There was a 50s film of it, certainly.
Yeah, and I remember that very, I'm going to say fondly, but it's a little bit scary at points. So that made a big impression. But yeah, that idea of humanity sort of battling off against the community definitely is a theme that we seem to lean into.
That's one theme. I think we were keen to move on to slightly more, maybe slightly more positive ones in the ones we were going to talk about. We also talked briefly about, there's quite a few where I think they use the aliens as a metaphor for maybe immigrants or just people who are different from you. There's quite a few where humans are very aggressive towards aliens who maybe aren't actually threatening violence in the first place. But we each picked a film we were interested in talking about. Both, I would say, more about communication. Do you want to start with yours? We both love this film.
That's I quite like alien films, being a bit of a interest in science and space. It's an area that I like. But yeah, one of my favourites is a film called Arrival.
Yeah, I love that film.
Which I think you've seen, right?
Absolutely.
But I really like that one. I think I like that one so much because it's not, I don't think it feels like a traditional alien film.
Absolutely agree.
Again, not too many spoilers, but aliens turn up and arrive at Earth, and we sort of follow the story of trying to figure out why they're here, what they might want. But it's really a focus on essentially understanding and the way language works, rather than aliens running around with laser guns, kidnapping people or keeping us prisoner or anything like that. It's much more about we've got these aliens here and they want to communicate with us and we want to communicate with them to try and understand, is this going to be positive, is it going to go negative? And I really like that it's the story of figuring that out.
Yes.
But then also the difficulties that come in understanding each other.
And in fact, the main character, played by Amy Adams, is a linguist, isn't she? She's brought in by the US military, I believe, to try and decipher the aliens' language.
Yeah, the aliens
That's a really
have
nice, different way of looking at it.
Yeah, they have this really complicated language, and it's that
kind of pictorial pictograms, I think.
Yeah, they're big, like sweeping circles with bits sticking out. Very different to our form of writing or form of writing you might see here. But yeah, I think you could almost get rid of the aliens from the story and have this as two nations of people meeting and trying to understand for the first time. But I think it really builds on the idea of it's understanding. I think there's some brilliant moments in the film where we translate a small portion of a message and then you see wildly different responses from different people that
different people around the world interpreting it in slightly different ways, subtly different. But you see quite a lot of the theme of this film, I feel like, is it's interesting. I find that the military first of all brought in the linguist, that's positive, but then you do start to get military reactions where people are starting to have that mistrust and they want to have an excuse almost to fight the aliens off.
Yeah, exactly. And I think, again, it plays on that human behaviour of, it's interesting to start with, we're figuring this puzzle out. And then after a while, it's like, well, hang on, we need to figure this out quickly, because if they're here doing something nefarious, then, are we going to be caught out? And I think that's I really like that as a play of, this is, ultimately it's not whether they are hostile or peaceful, but it's actually, can we ever understand that message and make sure we've got that clear understanding?
Yeah, I think we're both agreed, an absolutely phenomenal film. Mine, probably a little bit less known. That I think was from 2015 or 16, I think so, Arrival. Yeah. Mine's from 1997, much older. I really like this film. I remember seeing it at the cinema. I haven't seen it since, but I did reread the plot just to make sure I was up to speed. But I remembered it fairly well. It's called Contact.
Yes, I've heard of Contact, but for my great shame, I've not got round to watching it. There are a lot of films out there, a lot of media to consume. It's on my list, but I've not quite got round to it. It
wasn't quite as universally well received as Arrival, but it was well received. It's basically, it seems to be reviewed as a good film. Based on a book by Carl Sagan. Famous scientist and science communicator in the States when he was alive. And he has a particular kind of approach to SETI, the search for extraterrestrial intelligence and alien life. He's quite positive.
That's what the film's about, right?
Absolutely.
I think it's about receiving a message and going from that. I think I know
Yes.
roughly that much.
So Jodie Foster's the main star of this, pretty much in her prime in the 90s. Won a couple of Oscars by that stage, so a big box office draw. She plays, again, it's based on a scientist, so
Yeah.
we've got a bit of a theme of what we've picked there. She's working on SETI, the search for extraterrestrial intelligence. There's a billionaire industrialist who...
There always is, I think.
Often, yeah. Not quite as eccentric as maybe Jurassic Park, but, same idea. He's giving her some independence from the US military, which is kind of important as a plot point a bit later on. She's able to continue research, which might otherwise have been shut down. And she receives a message, or detects a signal, rather. Mm-hmm. And within that signal, it strikes her as a bit strange, so she's investigating it, and she discovers a hidden video, which is, I think it's a clip from the 1936 Olympics of Hitler, which is a bit sinister. Some people sort of see that and immediately jump to the conclusion that's an aggressive statement. But I think it's just supposed to be the first video message that they got out through space.
Yeah, well,
something like that.
I think that was one of the big events that we did first, broadcast quite publicly. So I
probably
guess
more
there's sort of
powerfully
a connection back into why they got that. That makes sense.
Anyway, she finds that, which absolutely convinces her there's something going on here. She realises it's a sequence of prime numbers. There's a message, and it turns out that she interprets this, and she realises that there is basically there's plans in this message to build what looks like it could be a way of a person travelling into space.
Right, okay.
Way beyond our own technology.
Okay, yeah.
So a lot of the film obviously is the kind of dynamics of her and others like her pushing to do this and thinking this must be a positive thing.
Yeah.
Military pushback.
I was going to say, it sounds like there's a
lot of politics.
A bit of, the politics of not necessarily what the message is, but how we respond to that, which I think is really
and whether we can trust it. Do we build a machine and then someone gets into it? Well, what if it's a bomb? There's all this kind of thing. They do build it. For various things happen. Again, I don't want to give too much away. Jodie Foster does get a chance to try it out. There's some ambiguity in what happens. One of the really nice things about this is that it doesn't show you the aliens. So it's left slightly ambiguous. There's a really nice touch at the end with some politicians involved, or at least White House officials, I think they are, which gives away something about which way it might go. But it is left a bit ambiguous.
But you never quite know what's happening.
Never quite sure. Is she hallucinating stuff, for example? There's that kind of vibe going on. There's a lot of kind of pushback on this slightly independent scientist. So yes, another really interesting take, I think, a different way, but about aliens, actually a quite benevolent form of aliens, trying to communicate with us, trying to help us, which is kind of similar to
and I think that's
the vibe in Arrival, at least.
Yeah, I think that's interesting because we don't know. We put all these ideas about what alien life might be like. Is it going to be like us? Is it going to behave in similar ways? And I always think that's really interesting about these sorts of films is actually they're kind of just a reflection on, what we think about each other and how we interact, because we see all of this happening, when you look at the, old explorers that would go off to different parts of the world and you hear, really interesting tales of meeting new groups of people for the first time and, differences in behaviour. I never forget, I think it's the famous story about David Attenborough, who met a tribe that, had never been contacted from what we could tell by another organisation, and they charged down the hill with spears. I think the story is that he stood there and held his hand out and offered them tea, and it's like this feels bizarre, but also it's trying to get that shared understanding of how do you approach a new situation. Absolutely,
and often alien films are metaphors for that kind of thing. Well, talking about that perfect Leicester legend, probably a good place to end our first portion here. When we come back for our second portion, we're going to talk about how maybe this might play out in real life. So in our second segment today, we're going to leave the sci-fi behind slightly and talk about what we have found about what would happen if we did actually detect alien life for real. Now, I should say up front, we've been looking for sort of protocols that exist about how to deal with this situation, and we haven't found very much that actually is confirmed, firmly in place, agreed.
Yeah,
I think you found something about a general approach.
Yeah, I think the official stance is that... first of all, if aliens landed tomorrow, we have zero plan, zero clue, which is slightly terrifying.
Or at least zero plan that we're aware of. Those sort of plans probably would remain secret.
Arguably, they could have kept them secret. But that being said, we have got general approaches to general diplomacy and stuff like that we could rely on. So I don't think we're completely out. But, like you say, the other more likely scenario that people have started to think about is if we received a signal. Okay, so if we suddenly got a message beamed in that was like, hey, we're aliens and we're here. And so, there's still no any official regulation that a country has sort of held up and said this is what we would do, but there is an international non-governmental organisation that came together and sort of put together a list of protocols and principles that they think would be a sensible plan.
I have the name here because I knew we'd both have to refer back to this. It's the IAA, the International Academy of Astronautics.
That's the one.
I was never going to do that without reading it.
No, it's a tricky one. It's a lot of vowels as well.
So what have you found for their general protocol?
So they wrote this all the way back in, I think, 1959.
Oh, wow.
So it's a long time ago, back at the dawn of the space race and things like that. Nowadays, we tend to focus a little bit more on what we've got, and I think as we've detected that there's less. But they basically laid out a basic procedure which essentially boils down to, first of all, if you get a signal, confirm that you have got a signal, you've not made a mistake in your measurement, always a good start. Then speak to all the other sorts of organisations that track these things. Tell them you found a signal, ask them to verify that you've got a signal.
So the scientific approach of verifying and repeating if possible.
Yeah, you don't want to create a drama when it turns out you just detected someone's microwave going off on your telescope or something like that. Or something like that. Then it would go to informing the public and the science community at large, which I thought was interesting. Yeah, you sort of assume that this would be kept super secret, but I think because it's written by this astronomical union that are mainly representative science is quite a public affair.
Yeah, okay, so they're thinking differently than a government might think.
I think so,
so it's perhaps telling that this is not a governmentally agreed protocol.
Yes, and I wonder if that's perhaps why it's not been officially held up, because they'd like to hold a little bit back. And then it sort of goes on, then you speak to governments, and it then essentially boils down to don't respond until we've had appropriate international discussion. So the idea is...
I found, sorry to slightly interrupt you there, but I found a more detail from the same organisation where they'd put together, I think much later, maybe wanting to flesh out that step. They put together a very detailed protocol, I should say, of exactly who you consult, when you consult them. You go to the UN, 9-point steps of what you do to agree the message you're then going to send. So that I think probably fits into your wider protocol.
So this sort of protocol sort of end at the sending a message step. It's sort of verify that it's there, tell everybody that it's there so they can keep an eye on things, make sure we monitor the organisation that looks after the spectrum, tell them that the message came through here so they can protect that, so if any more messages come through, make sure you don't respond until we've had meetings, and then I think they defer to presumably this set of protocols for how we'd respond. So how would they respond? Is there a
they don't
plan?
say. No, they don't say, but it's all about who to agree with. Like I said, talk to the UN. No, I'm going to just read one bit I happen to have. No communication to extraterrestrial intelligence should be sent by any state until appropriate international consultations have taken place, etc., etc. It goes on for quite a long time. It's lengthy, but it's very much about the process you would do to agree a message to then send on behalf of the Earth, rather than a rogue state sending one off just without anyone else agreeing, it should say. So that's quite a principled, I'd say, approach.
Yes.
To what we found, maybe even idealistic. One other thing I did find, and no one on the internet can confirm if this is real. There's enough references to it. I think it probably is, but no one seems quite sure. I'm just scrolling down to where I've got it. Here we go. So this is a US military protocol, allegedly, from 1950.
Wow, okay, early.
We think it's called 7 Steps to Contact.
Okay.
What I've got listed is 6, so who knows? But no one agrees. I think this is interesting. This is a slightly different situation. This is much more, we've detected alien life on another planet or moon, somewhere we can potentially visit.
Right, okay.
This might apply if we found something in our own solar system, for example. But broadly, it's very sensible. It doesn't read like a military warmongering approach. It's quite sensible. So this is much shorter, so I'll read these out. The first step, this could be 2 steps, maybe that's why it's 7. Remote surveillance and data gathering. So you look from afar, you learn what you can.
Keep an eye on what you've got, plan it out.
Exactly. And this, I should say, this is in the event of finding potentially intelligent life.
Right, okay.
The next step, covert visitations. Learn about their technology.
Okay.
So a bit more data gathering, basically. Near approaches to determine if they're hostile. So the idea is you get close, hopefully at a place that they can't see you yet. They don't realise we're there, so we can learn a bit more. Brief touchdowns to take samples. Make ourselves known, close approaches for wide visibility, and then land and attempt communication. So it's a kind of a gentle approach to
Yes.
learning about whether they might be hostile and whether we could
And
communicate
I
with
guess
them
that
before
slow
we just go in.
escalation as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, I guess that makes sense.
It seems sensible.
I think that's quite nice from, the bits that we found is that it seems like there are sensible plans.
Yeah.
But I guess the burning question I'm sure people at home are thinking about, and I'm going to ask, do you think there's any chance that these sensible approaches would be followed?
I mean, let's face it. Recent history would suggest maybe not. And I mean broader recent history, not just the last few months. I think it's optimistic to think they'd be followed. There's enough international conflict that the idea, for example, at the moment of America, Russia, China, the Security Council, basically the permanent members of the UN Security Council, them working together this constructively, I don't know.
Yeah, it's tricky, isn't it? I think it comes back to, in the first section we talked about alien contact in media, and I think, one of the categories of those is is that moment a unifying moment for everyone to work
Yes.
together, or is it an immediate divide of every country vying for get their hands on the alien technology or whatever it might
does
be?
this
I
become
think it's really
such-
interesting.
Yeah, does this become such an existential threat that it does bring us together and we, at least temporarily, put aside our differences? Yeah, I'm not sure I'm that optimistic. I'm not sure.
Yeah, it'd be interesting certainly to see.
One more thing that I've found in this just when I was researching these protocols is people talking about the probabilities of this actually happening. Now, of course, a lot of this is guesswork.
Yeah.
But a lot of people take the view that this is actually very, very unlikely, because either an intelligent civilization is going to be so far away that we can only really communicate remotely, or if they do exist, or did or could exist in the future, our lifespan on Earth, we believe, is so short, it's certainly in cosmic scale,
Yeah.
that the chance of someone being close enough and intelligent enough at the same time as us, and therefore being able to come across in the cosmos, in the universe, a species of similar intelligence is actually very, very unlikely.
Yeah, people forget just how big space is and how difficult it
Yeah.
is to get around. It always makes me chuckle. There's we're talking about alien contact, but we've actually attempted this. There's a really
Yes.
famous, I guess, experiment thing that was done called the Arecibo message. So we took a message that we encoded with some information. And we thought, well, let's beam this out to a local cluster of stars
Yeah.
to give a little bit of an indication of, hey, we're here. We're looking for signals and we get them. Which sounds, potentially, I think great. Let's reach out and try and do
Yeah.
it. But the star cluster they've beamed it to is 25,000 light years away.
The
It's gonna take-
Hercules Globular Cluster. I
Yes,
think it
that's
is.
the
Yeah.
one. So it's going to take 25,000 years before our phone call to another
Yeah.
potential group of aliens gets there.
And it's very much potential. It's just,
Yep.
here's a group of stars in roughly the same place. Let's send it there.
So we've got to wait that. And then we've got to wait for them to send a message back.
Yeah.
Which then another... So, in 50,000 years, maybe we'll get a response. But I think that's a reminder that actually, this is something that would be really, really difficult if
Yeah.
it ever did happen to get out there. But it's good to have a plan for what's going on.
Yeah, tied to what I was talking about, the very low probability of, at least in lots of people's minds, the low probability of finding another intelligent species out there. That then leads to another slightly different question of what would we do if we found very simple life forms?
Yeah.
We've talked, I think, in previous episodes about Europa, the moon of Jupiter, as a possible place where we think life might exist at the bottom of the oceans. And the consensus on that seems to be, well, we've sort of done that, because when we were back in our stages of exploring the world and not knowing as much as we now know, we would find new species that we've
Yeah.
never come across before. And Darwin's the obvious example, going off to South America and finding all kinds of things that led to the theory of evolution, but also new species that have never been found by Westerners, by Europeans, I should say. And it's very much, you take samples, you investigate them, hopefully non-intrusively. We don't want to be destroying these creatures. I think one of the things these days we probably would be quite good at as humans here on Earth is trying to respect the right to life of aliens.
Yeah, I think we see those lessons learned. You only have to look at some of the policies around sending things into space.
Yes.
We talk about how we, build things in a clean room where it's a contamination-free environment to make sure when we send stuff out there, we're not taking microbes and life with us. So I think, we've almost learned from our mistakes. You can look back throughout history of explorers changing whole ecosystems by introducing, an animal that wasn't previously on, a little island, and it completely playing havoc with the
Yes.
environment there. And I think, luckily, despite those mistakes that we've perhaps made before, thankfully we seem to have learned from them and at least got the idea of, like you say, I think if we do, we sort of know what we do. And so I think back to that terrifying prospect of not really having a formal plan, secretly, we've worked these things through, and we've got a huge amount of human history to build on.
We've done similar things
of
before.
What we've done. So I think we'd probably be okay.
Just one more thought to finish us off on this topic. The other way around, which is potentially the scary option. We're the inferior species, and a highly intelligent, super intelligent race of aliens who have the technology to beam themselves thousands of light years across the galaxy in days or whatever it is. Would they be benevolent towards us? Opinions differ. It's scary, and ultimately it's in their hands. We would like to hope that they will treat us with respect. Carl Sagan, I mentioned earlier, the author of the book that the film Contact was based on, he's very positive about alien life forms. And so he was very positive when he was alive. He always came up with the position of being very trusting and thinking, well, if they're that advanced, they would be benevolent towards us.
I think you kind of have to be, like you say, if you've mastered the technology to cross, thousands of light years and billions of kilometers in, the most hostile environment that we know. If they've turned up, we've probably got to hope that they're going to be friendly, because otherwise we may struggle. But that's how you start.
It's wishful thinking. It's hope. We're going to keep our fingers crossed here at the podcast, and we're going to hope that if we are encountering aliens, that they are those friendly, benevolent ones. Now that brings us close to the end of our episode, but as ever, we like to bring you ways to engage in space. Josh, I think you've got something for us this week.
Yeah, so we're talking obviously about sending messages out into space and things like that. And actually, there's a way that you can do that at home. Maybe not quite a full message, but regularly organisations like NASA and ESA, they like to often send messages or signals of home out to other places. So for example, last year we launched the Europa Clipper mission, and NASA ran a programme where you could add your name to a microchip. So I think several hundred thousand names of people that live down here have been sent out with that spacecraft to go and visit the moon of Jupiter. Unfortunately, I don't think there's any of those happening right at the moment, but as we've got upcoming big missions, keep your eyes peeled and you can have your name sent out into the cosmos, perhaps for an alien to read in the future.
And that does bring us to the end of our episode. So thank you very much, Josh. Thank you for listening and watching. We'll be back next Friday to go beyond the headlines once again. Make sure to tune in because we have our first guest interview next week. Very exciting. So please make sure to subscribe to Space Now in your podcast app and you'll never have to miss an episode.
And if you want to beam a message or a question across the cosmos to Pod HQ, then get in touch with podcasts at spacecentre.bsky.social, and we'd love to hear from you and answer your questions on the podcast.
You might even get a shout out in our next mailbag episode. Thank you very much once again. See you again soon.